Ready?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening. I'd like to call this special village board meeting to order. It is 6:14. Has this meeting been publicly noticed?
Yes.
Okay, all trustees are present except trustee Bockhorst, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And if you could just read the agenda item, because I do not have it in front of me.
Sure. We have considered the 2021 to 2030 long-range financial plan, and that is the only item on our agenda this evening.
Okay, and is Mark here to present, or how do you want to run it?
He is here, and he has a memo that he can tee us up and walk through.
Okay.
Good afternoon or early evening, however you want to take it. The long range plan now is, the front section of that has been integrated with the data based on the project schedule that was discussed a couple weeks ago. I did prepare a cover memo. It's a nice presentation. The first page of that is pretty much follow-up questions to the previous meeting and actions taken. So if there's any questions on that, I'd like to try to take it in small pieces so we can work through the process tonight as effectively as possible.
Does anybody have any questions for Mark on the memo?
All right, well, the second page of the memo is that.
Yeah, trustee Warren.
Is the cover memo what you sent around at 4:05? I have the paper copy of the plan. I'm just looking for the cover memo.
It's in the board packet materials.
Okay, so it's digital. Got it.
So are you referring to the debt stabilization options?
No, it's the 2021-2030 long-range financial plan memo.
Okay.
I only have the 2019-2027 financial plan, the supplemental. Is there something other than that? I have the long-range financial plan, the booklet, and then the supplemental information.
It's actually within the within the electronic packet that Sarah sent around.
Okay.
Where is that? I just have the join Zoom. I can't find my packet. Sorry, guys.
I would be happy to send an email right now.
Okay.
With the packet for.
Oh, wait, I got it. Okay.
Oh, you have it?
Oh, I have a question.
Trustee Menta.
On alley reconstruction, we're up to 1.15 million net of the 300,000. So that's 850. Okay, originally it was 750. What was it last time?
It was 750.
Okay, so there's another 100,000 in there. Okay.
Yeah, and just
Why?
just for the sake of being thorough, staff went back to the Sigma presentation, and the Sigma presentation actually indicated the total project cost to be 1.028 million. So once you net out the grant money for that, it was less than the 750 million benchmark. So we only needed to add $100,000 net to that benchmark to give the flexibility to add the alley C that we discussed at the last meeting.
Okay. Okay, great. So, yeah. So basically, we just talked about adding Oakland South and some money for the alleys, and they're both in here. So we're good. Okay, that's my question.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question for Mark?
If not, I can move to the second page of the memo,
Okay.
which in the memo format is headed agenda item discussion. And again, this has always been a challengingly long presentation. So given the fact that we're doing this tele mode, what I've tried to do is summarize each of the 6 key indicators that are identified in a long-range plan. And then if it's all right with you, we can kind of take them one at a time and work through the plan and then follow up with any other questions and see how that takes us. I certainly can go through page by page, but my thought is this might be a little more efficient to open discussion up at the board level instead of just listening to me talk about line 1 is this, line 2 is that, and so on and so forth for 2 hours.
Okay.
I know. So if that's acceptable, the first indicator is really the debt service requirements on page 4 of the long range plan. At the end of the day, line 7 shows our debt stabilization baseline. Line 8 shows the stabilization support needed to achieve that baseline. And then line 12 is the running balance of available funds projected through the long-range plan schedule, which does not take into consideration any of the actions the board may consider relative to the supplemental materials at the end of the packet, which talks about the actions that we took last year during budget on holding debt service fixed, and as well as the supplemental email I sent out this afternoon, with just a little backdrop information on how that process began with a significant jump in anticipated debt service in 2017 and 2018. Staff proposed that we could use some of the general fund reserves to help smooth that curve so that it's a little more managed growth in that debt service tax levy instead of the big jump to a couple $100,000 each year. And that has worked fairly well thus far.
Mark?
Yeah.
I was talking to Rebecca, and I don't know if it was the right, now that I'm looking at the chart. When do our available funds to supplement debt service run out on this chart? 2025?
When the numbers turn negative.
To 2025?
Correct.
Okay, so it keeps moving up a year. I think last year it was 2026, or what was it last year? Well, in the long range financial plan.
Yes, it was.
Right. So Becky,
keeping in mind that the project schedule metrics keep changing as well from year to year,
okay,
as well as available fund balance. Now, the materials at the end of the packet, the online board packet, will give you the comparative metrics between those couple options, between where we're currently at and on the long range plan and the options that the board reviewed last year during budget cycle.
And Trustee Warren, is your hand up?
Yes.
Okay, Trustee Warren, and then I have a question after that. Go ahead.
This is kind of a piggyback question. I don't want to sound nitpicky, but I want to know if this impacts our the stabilization fund at all. I noticed that in 2020, it looks like we should need about 330,000 to support stabilization support, and in the schedule it's only 297,000. So I'm wondering if there's any reason behind the difference in that number, and if there is, should that be then calculated into how much we have left in the fund, which would impact kind of how long it lasts. I mean, not in a major way, it wouldn't move it up or back a year, but I'm curious as to whether there's rationale behind that or whether it's just kind of the numbers got plugged in wrong into the table.
It should be a mathematical calculation there. If it's not, I can tell you that it shouldn't impact the number, because that number would reference backwards off schedule. And we really start out at the 850,000, which is what staff calculated to be the projecting available fund balance for 2020. So that number should not impact the schedule.
Okay.
So Mark, I just want to make a note. I think what's important, what I just said, and for the two new trustees, I say it every year, is because we just made the decision last year to spend a little more for debt stabilization, and because we're going to have that choice well, we don't have the choice, but we made the decision last year. We were going to run out of money to stabilize debt, and what that does is, instead of like hitting 2025 and all of a sudden we have this huge tax increase, or we have to cut, like slash the budget and core services, we only got 5 years or 4 more years to slowly, reduce services if you want to keep that tax increase to inflation. And so I say it every year. I just want to make the new trustees aware, as it's getting closer where we run out of supplemental money, that year's going to hit, and we no longer are going to, is that correct, Mark? Like, if we don't start trying to slowly cut services and lower our budget, what happens when 2025 comes?
No, you're absolutely correct. And that's why the materials at the end of the trustee packet review the discussions the board had during the last budget cycle, which explains if you want to proceed with holding the tax levy to zero last year and prospectively this year, it would require a reset when TID 1 closes at 2.3 million for debt service tax levy. And that's shown in the schedules attached to the village board packet after the long range plan.
And what
That
does
would be
that mean?
option
It just
A.
means that, I understand, but does that mean that the tax increment one, the residents are going to see any tax relief on their bill? It's going to go to debt stabilization, is what you're saying?
Well, in the narrative of that goes with that material under option A, it basically says what you just said, is that a significant portion of the village's tax relief would be consumed by resetting the debt service levy to a manner that is now, again, sustainable after the decisions last year. The good news from the perspective of the memo is that does not necessarily mean there'll be a tax increase at the property owner's level,
Right.
but certainly we're going to keep the levy low now, but that means less tax relief when TID 1 closes.
Well, it would just mean basically keeping it how we are right now at instead of actually giving a credit, like a big tax decrease, which was what we promised when the TID closed, but. Okay, thank you. Yes, Trustee Carpenter.
Thank you. Can you explain, sorry, can you explain that in maybe more on like an average home value? So, I know that we've talked a lot about on an average home value basis, what the closing of the TID would do, and sort of how that changes now. They were, I want to say it was a couple $100 decrease potentially in taxes, but that will all go
To
away.
stabilize
The debt. So is that, like, can you just kind of talk through that math?
Well, and this is what I'm referencing because I only have my printed copies with me as well, and I don't need to go to page 8, but on page 8, it shows that in 2022, under the current modeling, we would expect the village impact of a tax bill to go down $48 net, which includes that year's increase in debt stabilization, debt service levy, operational increases. We would still expect the village portion of that tax bill to go down about $48. Now there's a matching component to that from the other taxing jurisdictions as well. The school district is a little different path, but from the village perspective, it would be a $48 decrease in a tax bill. Now, the increase from the long-range plan on page 4, which basically says debt service in 2022 at 2 million, and then debt service in 2022 at 2.3 million on the supplemental materials that the board discussed last year during the budget cycle, takes about $60 in super round numbers per household on the tax bill. So it eats up the $48 on the schedule plus another $10 of the other taxing jurisdictions relief. So all other things equal, which of course we know they never are, it should still show you know, maybe a $30, $40 tax per household decline.
Mark, can I follow up with a question for Trustee Carpenter? So it's a tax increase even when the TIF closes. My question then is, even if we didn't put it to debt stabilization, we'd still have a tax increase. I mean, like, even when so if we didn't put it towards debt stabilization, like, and we still would have closed the TIF and still have a debt increase. I mean, a tax increase. Is that correct? In that year?
Well, again, you know, if you're talking about taxes and dollars, absolutely. If you're talking a tax impact to individual property owners, because now the equalized value of PID 1 is taxable against the general levy, well, that makes a piece of pie for every homeowner a little bit smaller, so the tax bill actually goes down.
So if we didn't use it for debt stabilization, you're saying the taxes would go down in 2022?
Yes.
How would you feel? But the taxes are going to increase because you're not stabilizing the debt.
Well, again, I just don't want to mix terminology. So when we say taxes in my terminology is a dollar amount, an absolute. We're going to levy $12 million in taxes, right?
I mean, to the average. I was going off of Trustee Carpenter's question, just to the average homeowner. If you don't use the money for the debt stabilization, you know, the increase in debt stabilization needed, would the average homeowner see an increase or a decrease in 2022?
Well, the projected decrease, let me just flip to my schedule again, just was about a $48 savings for the village and another $48 for other taxing jurisdictions. We can round that to $100 drop in the tax bill as currently scheduled in the long range plan.
So can I ask?
Yes, Samantha.
So you're saying if we proceed with the numbers on line 10, on page 4, line 10 for stabilization. So we budget 377,814 and 418,872. So if we use those stabilization numbers, then on page 8 we will get on line 27 we'll get that savings. So is that correct? So the numbers and the table on page 8 incorporate the stabilization in the table on page 4. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
What does that mean, David?
Well, it means
of course, is that
if we do the stabilization as in this chart, then there will be a decrease on a $300,000 home of $48 when the TID closes. But I mean, I guess what's confusing to me about this is that in 2026, like, we're basically not going to have any stabilization. So we're going to jump from 2.3 million to 2.95 million because the fund's depleted, right? And that increase isn't shown in here. Like, you show a negative balance, but we don't really have, you know, we can't really fund it in a negative way. That's not a real fund. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway,
Yeah.
I mean, I think we do have a problem at this point. It got pushed out from 2025 to 2026, but I mean, I think when we were talking about the CAFR, and I said, look, we have fun. I mean, every year we do have fund balance, and Mark is not projecting. He's not projecting like one time, like for example, the money we got from the sale of the fire station. Now we put that in cap. We could put that here. I mean, you know, stuff comes in that we can throw into this. So he's not going to project that because he doesn't want to be overly optimistic. But
What do you mean the fire sale? Where
the
can
sale,
that? Yeah,
there-
how could we use that?
what?
How could we use that? Just give me.
We
Can
got
we
half
plug it in?
we got $500,000 from the North Shore Fire District. Now we put that in capital expenditures fund, but we didn't have to do that. We could put it here instead, you know.
The only question I still have, and it's not resonating. We stabilize debt with our general fund so that debt does not go above the cost of the debt to the home to the in taxes is doesn't go above 5%. But if we don't stabilize it,
No, we don't.
Then
No,
the-
it's
right? If you don't stabilize it, taxes go up.
Well,
the 5%. Yeah, explain to her what the 5% is.
yeah, let me try to rephrase it a little bit differently and see if this answers your questions, because it is a challenging metric. So
Okay.
again, the table on page 4 increases the tax levy each year by 5% for debt service. The problem with that table on page 4 is on line 12, it shows that doing that, we run out of sufficient funds to achieve that
Yep.
Is that noise?
process
That's so,
in
what is that noise?
2025. Now, in 2028, you'll see on line 8, little gray boxes with no numbers, right? So that's when it would no longer be needed, because the debt service at that point starts going down as some of our older debt gets retired, even with all the new projects that we're proposing. So
To date. Okay.
today.
Mhm.
So the trick is, you know, what path do you want to take forward on managing the debt service tax levy so that you don't run $1 million short in 2027?
2026 or
So-
2027?
Well, 2027 is when you'd be $1 million short, 1,002,000. So that is, again, just loop back to the materials that we talked about during last year's budget cycle.
Well,
You
2025
know,
was.
and as you might recall, in the 2020 budget cycle, the board decided not to increase the tax levy for debt service at all. And then the options that were presented, you know, discussed the impact of doing that, and the potential solution to holding the tax levy down in 2020 and 2021 was when all of the extra assessed value from the TID 1 district came online, you could essentially use that TID incremental revenue essentially to help support an increase in the tax levy for debt service without creating an increase in the individual homeowner's property tax bill. And that's, again, I tried to run 3 different scenarios. It's probably the second to last page or the last page of your online materials with the data and then the chart. So that's really, again, the long range plan doesn't try to predicate on what the board may do, but I did provide that information in the context of what we discussed last year during the budget cycle for this discussion.
If we use the 500,000 for debt service stabilization, when the TID closes, would the taxpayer see a decrease in their tax bill?
Yes.
Okay.
President Rozak,
Yes, that's correct.
to Trustee Amenta's point, was the option for the funds that we got from the North Shore Fire Board, was that an option to use for debt stabilization? Was the only place it could go was in capital expenses?
Nope, we could use it.
So is it too late to make that choice?
No. Mark?
Because just
If the village board wanted to transfer 400,000 from the capital reserves to debt service for stabilization, that would not present an accounting problem for the village, particularly as under some other criteria on annual funding. That would be perfectly acceptable.
I'm just, sort of thinking out loud here, but, from a resident's perspective, there's a lot of discussion of when each of the TIDs close, and that sort of, excuse me, that just sort of that expectation that was an investment that the community was willing to make so that it would provide some sort of tax relief. So for taxes to really plateau in that year when the TID closes, I think is going to be hard for a lot of residents to swallow.
I agree. That's why I'm trying everything over here.
I also when TID 1 closes, whatever's left after that final debt service payment is made, whatever's left over gets split between the taxing jurisdictions. So, I mean, could be we have like a couple hundred, when the TID closes, we'll have a couple 100,000 from that also. I mean, I just think there's money, there's these sort of unanticipated things. Of course, then there's a year like this year where we may have to dip into reserves because of unanticipated expenses, although we haven't really, from our last report, it seemed like we were doing okay. But I guess my point is, there's stuff that happens and when there's something that happens to the good, I think I agree, we should probably funnel it to debt service stabilization. But the only thing I want to say is let's wait for budget and see what comes in under the capital expenditures fund, what the requests are for that levy funded capital. So let's see what's there, because then there may be something like the Hubbard Park parking lot, or I don't know, whatever. There may be something that we really want to do with that money. So I would just say let's wait for budget but keep this in mind,
If I could add one more.
We had talked about during budget, I just wanted to remind the board that one of the options was to utilize the 500,000 specifically for like environmentally friendly or green infrastructure improvements. That was one discussion point. And then now today we're talking about the debt stabilization for the use of that 500,000 or 400,000. So just wanted to, in budget, we'll be bringing that back up. Trustee Carpenter, and Mark, and then Trustee Carpenter.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I would just like to kind of build off of Trustee Amenta's comments. While staff has felt comfortable enough to project that the TID 1 increment for the village will be about $200,000, that is included on the one-time revenues in line 11 in 2022.
It's already in there.
However, we have other TIDs that are going to start closing between that time and the time that I would suspect we would be pushed to come up with continuing debt service stabilization. Those monies in 2025 and 2027 are not on this schedule because they're a little too unpredictable at this point. But again, we do expect to continue to hopefully operate with favorable budget outcomes. We do expect to have some supplemental funds coming in from the TID 5 and TID 3 closure. So again, this is your annual update with the information we know at the moment. once we issue our plans in a few weeks here, we'll know what those actual impact numbers will be on this schedule. And again, we'll have a continuing update discussion each year as those numbers get closer to, in a shorter time frame between that and the funding running out, different decisions can also be made. But
Mark, can I ask one more question just for the newer trustees? We always talk about the out years. I know this isn't very out, 2025, 2026. How much is budgeted in those years? I'm sorry, I don't have the document pulled up because I'm using 3 different machines and none of them have the right, one doesn't have Wi-Fi, one doesn't have Acrobat, Adobe, anyhow. But how much is budgeted for like road reconstruction? Is it still the same, like level amount? Because I know it drops off at a certain year. And so when you do these long range projections, if your expenses are dropping in the out years, we may actually have a need for more if the capital improvements continue to be stable, the need for them. So do you know in those out years when the road reconstruction fund goes down?
yeah, that's, again, it's in the project schedules. Let me flip to that and see if I can. Actually, I didn't include the out years in these project schedules. That was in the last discussion. But there's sufficient funds for that, and you're absolutely correct that those are going to start to drop down, all other things equal at this point.
No, but in this spreadsheet, so for the year 26, what is the budgeted, what's the input for the cost of road reconstruction?
Let me look at the schedule and the plan here.
Thank you. And Leanne,
Well,
what's
we've
the
got
average?
750,000 for alleys.
Okay.
And then in the coordinated, we've got $1 million on Lake Drive.
Okay, so it's the average, Leanne? About $1 million? Is that average? Is
I'm
that
sorry, average for,
road reconstruction? I mean, it's not dipping down by that year, the amount that we would be budgeting for road reconstruction. So it's not like an out year.
I would say in the past, our road reconstruction would have averaged about $1.75 to $2 million. Though I wouldn't necessarily be able to apply that to our programs going forward because they deviate so far from the norm because of them being combined with the combined sewer improvements. I don't think you can apply the average going forward.
All I wanted to make the point is at some point we're done. Staff's always made the point that we're done with road reconstruction. We've reconstructed all the way.
No, ma'am. Staff has always made the point that you will never be done with road reconstruction. You will simply level out the programs and you will be able to reduce the amount on an every other year basis. You're never done.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there's a point where we start reducing funding for road reconstruction.
Right, and then that funding, or at least a portion of that funding, should get shifted to major maintenance, which would be mill and overlays.
Okay, so in this schedule in front of us, all the way through 2030, we have stable funding. There's no decrease for road reconstruction without an increase in something else. For these projections to come in with these numbers of the money we need, there's no decrease in expenditures. The total expenditures, like you just said, Leanne. I always thought, Mark, as you know, we've talked about this a million times, that was my big hang up, that in the out years, we decrease expenditures. Therefore, our predictions, if Leanne is correct and the expenditures are going to be stable, they're just going to shift, then our projections are a little off.
Well, again, we're only projecting through 2030 at this point. The out years is for 2031 and on. Really was just to share the conceptual outlook of what we had identified as still
Right. So
uncompleted
given this schedule,
segments.
So through 2030, you can, it's fair to say expenditures remain stable. Like we haven't decreased expenditures through 2030 for capital improvements in our projections.
I would not say that. I would say that it's consistent with the project schedule the board forwarded for development of this program. I mean, there's a lot of shifting components between water and sewer and levy funded projects due to some major efforts. But
Okay.
that's kind of, that's the outlook, right? You know, now obviously there's still more to be done, but I do think that there's, depending on the combined nature of some of these efforts, that there's a more emphasis on water and or sewer infrastructure than there may have been strictly on roads alone, if that were the only thing going on. So
that's why they're
mod-
correct. That's why you'd see the user fees to continue going up, because we're shifting the expenditures over to water and sewer.
that is certainly one aspect of that, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions on that? Go ahead, Mark.
I was just gonna say, so that's the outlook as we see it today. We will obviously talk more about the debt service tax levy at budget cycle. And again, a good prep for that discussion is still the materials that are included with this packet, because that's what I'm gonna share with you during budget. So if you wanna take some time outside of this meeting to give that a closer look, I'm always happy to answer questions on that too, so we can be as thoughtful as we can going into the budget process. I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
The next item on the key indicators is number 2, the village's debt service capacity under state statutes and municipal policy objectives. That's the chart on page 5. The village's limit under state statutes is 5%. We are significantly under that. We are not quite at our goals for debt service as outlined in our financial policies at the end of the plan. But we are moving in that direction, and we are definitely compliant with the limits identified in the policies at the end of the plan. So
When do we reach our goal as stated in the plan?
well, it's a function of the amount of work that the board would like to continue with.
I mean, in these projections.
Well, the blue section on that chart, according to the goals in the financial plan, is 1.25. So somebody just did something. Everybody there? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you, Mark. Allison, I think your iPhone is picking up either some background noise or some.
Hold on. Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I'm coming.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, that's much better. So the financial policy goal is 1.25% for general government debt. And the long range, the chart there shows us being about 1.34, 1.35, 1.25, 1.39. So, you know, a little bit above that, looking out in the 2025 to 2030 range. And it's strictly a function of the amount of work that we want to engage in over the next 10 years. So again, President Rosick, you had a great observation that, you know, as we trend forward, you know, the financial commitment to that may start to decline, and that should bring us into our long-term goal of 1.25% of total equalized value for municipal debt.
So Mark,
Um,
sorry about this. Trustee Warren.
Sorry, and maybe I missed this in the packet, Mark, but, and just to help me understand, the goal, was that a best practice, Village of Shorewood policy, or something that arises from the Wisconsin statutes, just out of curiosity?
That
That's
is a village policy that is on page 43 of the plan,
Thank you.
and it sets forward some goals. The goals are framed as a percentage of our debt capacity, which is 5%. So you have to do a little quick conversion of some of that, but again, we're under our limits, working towards our goals at this point.
So can I follow up on Trustee Warren's question? Every year we talk about this. Trustee Warren, you may remember from last year, we can change our own policy, and every year we had the same discussion. Somehow we started using the word goal. I think we did change the policy and made it a goal instead of a requirement, because for the bond rating agencies,
Correct.
it's showing me that why would we not, if we were projecting out to 2030 and we still have not met our goal, why are we not changing our goal? Because this is, the baseline of our capital improvement program, I don't see it decreasing in these years that are projected. So what's the harm in changing our goal or our policy? Why do we shoot for something that we have not been able to achieve, nor will we anytime within the next decade?
That's certainly a board decision.
And I just don't, I've been here for so long and I still don't know why it's that goal. Trustee Menta, maybe you.
Just to follow up with my experience on that, although I've only been with the village a couple years longer than you have, President Rozek, but again, it's an objective that the board would like to maintain a certain amount of austerity measures, trying to manage a target level. The impetus between changing it to a goal was because we are in a period of escalated activity for bonded projects, capital projects. So certainly, revisiting the goal, it would be something that the board could do, or just again as a benchmark, something to shoot for. So long as we are under the limits of the policy, we don't
But
get
why that
any
number? I mean, do you remember, or Trustee Mentor or Mark or anyone, or Leanne, does anyone remember why that percentage? Is there a certain, like Trustee Warren said, is a state goal and we're copying it? Like, why did we pick that number?
No, I'm not privy to where that number came from, other than it's modest. But that predates my time at the village.
I mean, would you feel comfortable with making the percentage match what 2030 is?
Well, that's really not a staff challenge.
I mean, would you feel uncomfortable with that?
I wouldn't know. But again, that's a policy decision.
I would recommend that we change it to match something like in the, 10 years, a decade from now, what do we project it's going to be? And that's where our goal should be. This is our baseline capital plan. It's not our, we're probably going to add more than we're going to subtract.
Fair point.
Anyway, I just bring it up every year. I just think we should make it realistic. If there's no rationale of why that number, like it doesn't match the state goal or it doesn't match a requirement. Anyways.
Yeah, I think from a bonding perspective, having a significant reserve capacity adds credibility to the village credit rating, but I don't think that there's a magic number there. You know, if it was 1.25% or 1.5%, you know, I think the critical thing is the village's debt capacity doesn't start getting up towards a 4% of the 5%, and we're a fair shake away from that level of debt. So
I do remember one finance meeting many years ago where we discussed this, and there was some concern that the rating, because we're not within our own policy, there was some concern that that would be that would be a negative on the ratings agency. And then, but we never, that was the one time we talked about it and it never came back. And this was under the prior
I remember that.
village manager. But I think we have a policy and we have a plan that shows we're not, within our, on the one hand, a policy is a goal. And I think it's getting to the goal of what is the amount of outstanding debt we want to have relative to our reserves or relative to our overall revenues. What is this? Oh, this is percentage of equalized value. So it's a goal in terms of how, we could go all the way up to 5% and fund everything, but then, we'd have so much of our capacity to pay for stuff wrapped up in debt that it gives us a lot less flexibility in terms of services. So it's just this balancing of, just like we would do in our home budgets, of how much are we going to borrow and then have to be paying that debt versus having money to go on vacation. You know what I mean? It's the same, it's just that's balance, and that's all the policy really is about.
Right. But I think you're absolutely nailed it, because we as a board, for now consistently, since I've been on the board, have shown that we're never going to meet that percentage, because we've chosen a capital program that stays around, what is it, 1.5, in the next decade. So I just feel like if we've been consistently choosing that, that's the balance that the board has struck as where we want our debt to be in the next decade. If we really wanted it to be going down and not at that percentage, we need to actively be doing something about it. And I just don't see that we're matching those two.
Well, the total debt, the total amount that we're talking about funding, of course, the big one is the sewer project. There's, that's 20 million or 30 million here of this. But in terms of other things, I think the total number has kind of either stayed the same or gone down over time. So, I agree, it probably makes sense to change the policy to be more consistent with the plan, but I think that's also something we can address, at future meetings.
When do we talk about this stuff again?
I have two questions, please.
Yes.
So what would, if we don't like the number that's in there now, what should the number be? And does moving Oakland Avenue reconstruction affect this debt discussion by moving it from 2028, I think, to 2024? How does that affect this discussion?
I don't think it does, because we're still above our policy level with that in the plan, no matter what year. It won't. Is that correct?
Well, I'm just looking up real quick to see what the Oakland number is, 2.2 million. So on extrapolating from the follow-up to President Rosick's question from a previous meeting, about $100,000 in debt changes debt service by about $7,300 per year, which is about $1.50 per household. So 2 million would change it $150,000 a year. So, but yes, that's $150,000 a year to the debt service schedule, in very round numbers, please. That is moved from 2028 up to 2024 now. So, but also, again, within the total curve, I
Right.
think you're generally gonna do the same amount of programs in the,
Mhm.
you know, relatively same time frame. So you end up at the end of the day in the same place at the end of the schedule.
And so trustee Stokebrand asked a second question, which was, what would the number change to based on to match what we are projecting? What would that percentage be? What number would we pick? And I don't have it in front of me, but.
Yeah, I have no recommendation on that.
Okay, let me find the numbers. Trustee Menta, can you help me? I mean, we're above it. So what are we above it? I can't find the chart. Just average them. Just take the 10 years and average them and come up with the percentage.
Well, again, you know, you could certainly pick 1.5%.
Right.
You then would be within your goals, which again, given the 10-year outlook, I think would be a reasonable assertion, right?
Yes.
But that's, yeah, I mean, and we can
Just average
certainly
it.
schedule real financial policies for a subsequent meeting, you know, sometime when time permits.
Okay, is that where we would do it?
Yeah, they're separate policy documents. It's not part of the long range plan except as an appendix.
Okay, thank you. Did that answer your question, trustee Stokebrand?
Yeah, so it sounds to me like it's sort of like your doctor tells you, you know, I'd really like you to be at this weight, and you say, I would too. But, you know, for 10 years, you come in, you know, 5 pounds over, and you just always say, wow, I really need to lose those 5 pounds. I don't mean to simplify things, but is that what we're saying here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I guess, you know, I defer to the people who've been here longer than I have, but I have no problem with a goal being a noble goal and a reachable goal, even though we never reach it. But if others are more comfortable going with something more based in reality, I'm fine with that too.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have questions or comments? All right, if not, continue on.
Thank you very much. The third key indicator is the village's levy limit outlook under current state statutes. And to that, we flip to page 11 on the long range plan. Oops. No, page 7. I'm sorry. Line 11 on page 7.
Okay.
So the real takeaway here is we use state law to do all sorts of fun math up on top of the chart. It has to do a lot about the amount of levy we claim for debt service under certain filing requirements. But at the end of the day, we contrast line 10 to line 9, the maximum allowable levies under state law, and then show a reserve capacity moving forward on line 11. So in a real nutshell, line 10 shows the tax levy with basically a 2% increase per year plus a 5% increase for debt, which I think nets out to about 2.5% once you figure in the debt service is only a portion of the operation of capital. So even building in that amount of growth in our levy, the village maintains reserve capacity for increased programming or activities under the state's levy limit, as illustrated on line 11. And many communities are really challenged each year because they're already at their levy limits, and they have to make even more difficult choices than our board does each year. The one other thing to note, similarly to some of the things with the fund balance, on line 6, you know, staff does not project any future growth past line 2021 or year 2021. I use 2021 because I know what the assessed values are going to be in 2021 for the 2021 budget. So that's there, but we will have some growth. I mean, even if it's just through home renovations, there'll be some growth for new construction, but it's likely to be fairly modest unless we have some very significant renovations. Obviously, the school district works is on tax exempt property, so that doesn't count towards anything. So this is, again, a conservative outlook that, you know, should the board, you know, choose to pursue the current strategy, or I shouldn't say strategy, but pursue the numbers as outlined in these projections, the board would not be constrained by state levy limits well past 2030. So that's in a nutshell. That's good news.
But what about expenditure?
A lot of communities struggle with.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just laughing because isn't it this total expenditure limit that is our problem?
Expenditure restraint can be a challenge depending on the annual budgets, and we work through that. But yes, because we have the reserve capacity to increase taxes, should we choose to do so, it really becomes more of a expenditure issue for about $400,000 of annual state funding that the village receives.
Right.
So we need to monitor that in conjunction with our levy limits. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but I generally don't see a trend to increase taxes much more than 2% a year in the long run, right? So I think this is a real nice, again, I will call it a benchmark for planning purposes, but it does show that the village has the flexibility to be able to respond to changing circumstances should it be merited.
Okay.
Absent any other questions on that, it's pretty straightforward, I think. I mean, the numbers can be challenging, but I've worked through those. And it's really, again, looking at 9/11 and that takeaway. So then the next is the key indicator number 4, which talks about the village's operational forecast based on current fiscal trends. And that's on the table on page 9. And again, in a super nutshell, you know, we know what our debt service is going to be. We know what our capital projects are. I've got revenues in one part of the table, expenditures in the other part of the table. You know, bonded projects are offset by bonded expenditures. We plug in the property taxes as we just described under that moderate levy assumption. But you'll see at the bottom of the page, there's red numbers on the bottom of the table. And the challenge with that is, you know, we generally project our expenditures are going to increase by 2% a year. Our property taxes for operations and capital are going to increase by 2% per year. We're going to, you know, debt service is already kind of figured in top and bottom as we previously discussed. But our other non-tax revenues are only going to grow at 1% per year.
Wait, can I stop you there for a second? So Mark, just to be clear, this projection factors in a 2% tax increase every year.
2% for operations and capital, and a 5% on debt service per the station
Right.
outline.
So in other words, when we say we want a 0% budget this year or last year or whenever, that would make the gap even bigger because the revenues, we're not increasing taxes by 2%. So your gap would become larger.
All other things equal, that's correct.
Okay.
So the real takeaway here, in addition to the observations of President Rosick, is that we've got about 3.5 million of non-tax revenues that are not keeping pace with costs. increasing. A large portion of that is state aids. State aids have been holding fairly steady with nominal increases. You know, who knows what the future is really going to bring? But we also have a lot of internal revenues of fines and fees and permits and the like. You know, and again, you know, there's no modeling to suggest that those are going to automatically go up with costs. So we have to look at that each year during the budget cycle and find a way to look at 2021, get it all to balance, and then next year the table gets reset for this, and it shows what the 2022 deficit will be, because these are cumulative numbers across the bottom. They're not, so when you reset 2021, then everything down the line drops by that amount. And the same thing happens each and every year. But that's one of the reasons the budgeting process is very challenging. You know, we're an established, built-out community. There's not a lot of new revenue opportunities per se. So we're always challenged to manage that scenario. That's where each year we spend a lot of time together talking about you know, revenues, expenditures, the real desired increase in the property taxes or acceptable level given the trade-offs that you have to make to achieve that. So that's really the purpose of this forecast, is to reemphasize that it's not a problem to have these discussions. It's structural, and we will continue to have those during our budget discussions each and every year.
And I just wanted to bring up, in the ICC, one positive is they did receive a hearing this year, the bill for a Milwaukee County sales tax. It's a 1% increase in the sales tax, and the municipalities would split like half of the money, and the rest went to Milwaukee County. So who knows how it'll evolve over the legislature, but that is hope for the future, that we would get some revenue from a different source. Other than that, I haven't seen any other revenue source mentioned, new revenue source.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of transition, you know, before we get into the budget cycle, it'll probably actually come up in July. You know, staff has kind of got standing orders to present to each year's trustees a listing of prospective alternate revenue options, revenue diversification away from property taxes. None of those are inherently appealing, because diversification does not, you know, we're not getting money from outside of the community, right? We're raising our own or fees or whatever it is, but we'll continue to present those for discussion, if for nothing else, you know, for good due diligence to, you know, continually evaluate that and any new opportunities that may present themselves. So,
is this something that we can do at the strategic, when we start meeting in person again, at the committee of the board? What is it called? Strategic initiatives. Trustee Bachhorst heads. I always thought that was what the committee was set up for, was things like long-term perspective, different revenue sources, diversification. We just have not had that committee meet since I took presidency. And I really feel like it's a very important committee that should be looking at things prospectively, and we just don't send things there.
well, we'd be happy to participate in that discussion.
Rebecca, can you just make a note of that? It'd be great discussion throughout the year. Okay, thank you.
The next key indicator is the projected financial performance of the village's TID districts. And those come in on page 12 through 15. The way these tables read in a nutshell is, you know, I know what our debt requirements are going to be for these districts. I know what our general expenditures are going to be for miscellaneous items. I'm projecting equalized values and tax rates, again, using the same modeling assumptions that we do for the rest of the schedules. And then you get to the very right column, and you see a red outlined area, and that's where we're going to have more cash on hand than we will outstanding debt, and that's the year that we can close the TID district, once we can satisfy all the debt. So for TID 1, that'll be next year unless the village board moves to extend that for affordable housing. That presentation will be coming later this summer to the board for their review. Any questions about TID 1?
Does it go to CDA first? Because they are a housing authority?
Rebecca?
I would think so.
There's the TID reports are always provided to the CDA, but the JRB is the one who reviews the annual TID reports.
No, about extending the life of the TID 1 for affordable housing. That happened.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes,
That
the CDA will be reviewing that.
Okay.
So we know pretty much where TID 1 is going to be. Those are real tight numbers. And we'll review that later this year again. On page 13 is TID 3. Current modeling looks like 2027 will be the year that TID district closes. Now again, 2027 was 7 years out. Some assumptions on property appreciation, some assumptions on taxes. You know, that year could move. And we will update this each year with fresh information. We are catching the full value this year for our Sherman, the Oaks housing development off of south of Capitol there, behind Corner Bakery. So that's really the last significant component of our TID 3 project plan. And the TID district's expiration date is 2035. So 2027 is 8 years before that mandatory close. And just a little backdrop is that this TID district was created at a time where it was really challenging to get anything off the ground. So this has really been activity that's happened in the last 5 years. So that's, you know, good solid, 2027 is a good solid close date. Perhaps it'll move up to 2026. We'll just, you know, we'll have to see how things develop over the next few years.
Mark, I have a question. Yeah, on the projected tax rate that you used, is that including, because the tax rate for the schools went up when the referendum passed. So are you including that bump in the tax rate?
We are modeling a flat 2% per, or a 1.5% overall tax rate increase. You know, I've not been apprised of what the school board outlook is for their tax rates.
Well, they've discussed it at their preliminary budget. So, I mean, why don't you might want to give them a call, and because when the referendum was approved, that was an increase in the tax rate. I think it was from 13.88 to 14 point something. I don't remember exactly.
All right, I will certainly do that.
So when you say 2% tax increases projected, do you mean just the village portion, or do you mean the entire tax rate?
I initially misspoke. It's 2% for property appreciation, 1.5% for the tax rate. And that's that center section above the colored sections. It tells you what the assumptions are.
I mean, is it?
And that's for everybody. That's an aggregate.
Is
Yes.
that consistent with what the last 5 years has been in an aggregate?
I would have to review my data, but I think that is probably a little conservative.
I do too, because because the school districts raised it 4% every year. You know, like last year was 4%.
Yeah, and again, I'm not sure, as Trustee Amenta suggested, if that was a one-time increase due to their bond issue or if that's a trend. I'm not clear on that. I will check with the school district
No,
on
that
that.
wasn't for the bond. That was literally just their tax increase in addition to the referendum
Yeah, that was prior to the referendum.
every year. So what I would request is that you actually use a data point that makes, you know, that's based in, you know, past. So I would take an average of the last 5 or 10 years, whatever you feel is appropriate, and use that tax rate.
Okay, I will definitely take a look at the actuals then and
Okay.
and
There's 1.5
provide some
oh.
feedback on what those were.
Okay, thank you.
I will provide feedback on what the actuals were, and then we'll certainly look to update those metrics moving forward. On page 14 is TID 4. Again, that's a single project district with the Light Horse development. We're looking at 2028. Again, the mandatory close for this district was 2038, so that is 10 years ahead of schedule. Again, anytime you forecast out to 2027, 2028 data points, there's going to be some variability as each year is refreshed with actual data. Again, that's again one of the reasons why we do this on an annual basis, to give a fresh outlook for our own planning purposes.
And when you say ahead of schedule, you mean ahead of, it's closing before it has to close. It doesn't mean we're ahead of schedule from our projections.
I'm saying it's before it's required to close. Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
And then TID 5 on page 15 looks to me like 2023, but I think everybody's aware that we have some significant litigation on the assessed value for the metro market properties. So this is based on current valuations. I will tell you that I did run a stress test on that, and even if we were ruled adversely to Metro Market's claim, I believe the close date would just move to 2025 from 2023. So from a TID district perspective,
Really? What happened?
and it's performing fairly well. We'll have to see how that litigation works itself through in the next couple of years here, and then once we know that, then we'll eliminate that variable. But I did run it all.
That stress test, that's half the value. If say they got what they wanted, what they've asked for, that's half the tax assessed value, and it only pushes it out 2 years.
Well, it's half the value of that portion of the TID district. Yes, 2 years.
That is the only portion, isn't that the only property in that TID district?
No, you've got the mosaic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that'll become clearer once that litigation is resolved. But again, the range that we're talking about is, again, perhaps 2023, perhaps 2025, and then you throw in the standard variations between projected and actual results over that time frame. Perhaps next year we'll have a better indication of where we stand with that. But again, overall, there's no indication that that's going to be a distressed district under either scenario. It's just a matter of when it will close. If there's no other questions on those tables, then it's the future outlook of the village's water and sewer utility fees on pages 18 through 21.
What about the parking utility in a minute? Aren't we?
We can certainly just take a moment to talk about that if you would like.
I think it would be beneficial. I never understand the parking utility And we have 2 new trustees.
So on page 17 is the fiscal projections. Staff has reduced the 2020 projection for lot permit fees, consistent with the first quarter COVID budgetary outlook that staff provided a few weeks back. But structurally, based on the number of spaces on the lots and absent any other major dynamic change, the $175,000 permit fee number is been stable because there's no increase in fees, and we have not added any new lots recently. Now, obviously, I think it's apparent in everybody's mind that if citizens are making overnight on-street parking, that there will be a reshuffling perhaps of that metric a little bit, with perhaps fewer people on the lots, more people on street. But if you look at the last line on the table on page 17, you will see that the parking utility has accumulated over $400,000 of cash reserves to be able to respond to those changes until a new trend is established. So that would be staff's general perception of this, is that there's adequate cash reserves to be able to respond to change in those metrics. We do not project the need to increase fees over the foreseeable future. Of course, that could change if there's a dramatic shift in how overnight parking is administered in the community. So I would hope to reserve the right to review that once we get some actual data developing, should that direction be pursued.
Well, we already gave you that direction in our in the transportation and parking analysis meeting that the board had. That was our number 1 request, was to look at the financial projections based if we change if we vote as a board, majority vote, to allow overnight parking. We needed the financial projections, your best guess, but based on those 2 months of data from COVID. So, and
yep, we're working on that.
Okay.
We'll be working on that over the next couple of weeks here, and hopefully we'll have that ready for you to evaluate at that time.
Okay, and just for the record, what is the expenditures budgeted from parking utility? Wasn't it just, I mean, like how many parking what percentage of a parking checker is, we always go through this during budget. 0.25 of both. I'm sorry, I misspoke, 0.5. Okay.
So a half of a FTE of a parking checker is attributed to overnight enforcement of the lots.
And we have 2 parking checkers, or is it just 1 FTE?
There's 2 community service officers.
Okay.
So so the expenses on page 17, so there's 115,000 in expenses. I think the parking checker, like 0.5, is about 40 or 50. So the rest of that's DPW?
I would have to refer to the budget, get a little more detail on that. I do know that there's expenses for plowing that are cross-charged between departments. There are expenses for enforcement that are cross-charged between departments. There are also
you mean police? Okay.
Some depreciation amounts for the lots that are owned by the parking utility, and things like insurance and whatnot. So I could certainly provide a follow-up summary on that to that question after this meeting.
But I mean, right now, the parking utility is just dealing with village lots and private lots, just managing those, the permits and the other stuff, right?
That's correct.
And,
Okay.
and
I
parking
mean, but I
structure.
just, if I could just finish, I mean, people, I mean, there's payment in lieu of taxes, which is going from the utility to the general fund. So, I mean, there's that, about $42,000. So like, you know, if we we just have to be aware when we're making changes that the parking utility is kind of supporting the general fund, both in terms of some positions and some expenses that are now charged to the parking utility, and also that pilot. So there's a lot of like back and forths, and everything's very interconnected, and that's why trying to change our parking policy, there's a lot to work through.
Can I ask, oh, sorry. Thank you.
That's a great observation, and also my memory kicks back in that there's significant staff salary costs assigned to the parking utility, predominantly out of the customer service area, as a part of that 115,000.
Right, because there was a lot of human capital taken up from selling permits. I have a question though, and maybe this is for Rebecca. The police chief mentioned last year in budget that the parking enforcement checkers do not surveil or the parking structures to date. And I found that odd because we could be losing revenue from, ticketing. If we're permitting, we should be enforcing. And so are we currently, is our parking checker currently surveilling, or, I don't know what the right word is, but the parking structures as well as the lots?
Yes, so, and I provided a brief update on this in my internal Friday update, but he has clarified that they are reviewing the structures for nighttime parking. After hearing your question, there was a thought that I know at the Plan Commission, there was some discussion about how ascension spots are regulated within the scope of the structure, and we don't enforce their terms of 1 hour parking or those spots specifically for Ascension, but they do review the lots.
Okay. The structures. Okay.
Correct. Yes, sorry. My apologies. The structures.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Mark?
Well, thank you. That is good information to consider as we move forward with discussions in the next several weeks here. Page 19 then is the water utility. And again, my memo says is the real takeaway from my perspective is the line that talks about rate increases included above, which are in red print in your plans. That's where staff is forecasting that these project costs, inflationary expenditure costs, revenue trends, how that needs to be lined up to keep our utilities on a self-sustaining path that does not require taxpayer support, nor does it impede them from issuing its own bonds, so that the village's general obligation debt capacity remains available for the any future circumstances that the village board may deem appropriate.
So can I just make a note here, and you can let me know if this is correct? We're projecting in our forecast in this plan a 2% increase in taxes every year, in addition to taking a lot of the expenses in the out years in the next decade and moving them to sewer and water. So a 2% increase by lowering expenditures in on the tax rate, and then higher user fees because we're shifting the expenditures over there to keep the tax increase at only 2% in our projections. Is that a fair statement?
We're not shifting expenditures per se. I think the comment was that the overall level expenditures becomes more money for the Southeast Sewer Project in particular, and less money on roads. But we're not shifting expenditures for roads into the water utility. It's
The
really
overall-
just the work that's done for the water utility.
I'm just saying that in general, as Leanne, correct me if I'm wrong, but expenditure levels are projected to remain stable. It's just that more of the work is going to be doing, I think, in sewer and water in the upcoming years. But regardless of where, overall, we're projecting a 2% increase in our long-range plan of tax it rate, plus an increase in user fees to cover those same expenditures, to cover the expenditures we're projecting, which remain somewhat stable. Total. I think that's a fair statement.
Well, if I could jump in, Leanne, again, the 2% increases for operations and capital.
Yep.
The cost for the projects within the capital plan are funded by debt service, which is
Which remains at
being
5%.
managed under a different criteria. Then the cost for the infrastructure work done in the water and sewer utilities, that debt service is not in the debt service stabilization metric. That's funded by the
User
water and
fee.
sewer utilities.
Which we're projecting to go up. So all I said was we're projecting
Yes.
in our long range 2% tax increase. That's what you have in there in our 10-year projections. And then also user fees going up.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay.
Any other questions on the water utility?
I did have one question. It's a point of information. The narrative under recommended future rates for the water utility talks about a 10% increase in 2021, similar increase 2023, and then the next paragraph says, thereafter, future rate increases are expected to decline over time. Yet the chart on page 19 shows a 10% rate increase every other year for the next 10 years.
Yep.
All right, yeah. Actually, the increases for the water utility had been decreased from the previous projection in the early years. I neglected to update that language in the narrative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I will do that before we publish the online version.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the 10% every other year, that's what we're looking at.
And then every other year is sewer. Sewer is 1 year, water is an increase the next year. Sewer, water, sewer, water.
That is an intentional strategy, yes, is to try to mitigate the rate increases for utilities by alternating any rate increases, one utility on even years, one on odd. It doesn't matter which one's which, but basically not to double whammy from a rate management perspective, trying not to double whammy our utility customers with both water and sewer increases on any 1 year.
And a tax rate.
And that does lead us to page 21 then, which is the sewer utility table. And again, on that table, same basic thing applies. The rate increase included above line. We did have an 18% overall rate increase in 2020. That is reflected in the 2020 projected numbers. And then moving forward with the current project cost and implementation schedule, again, there's a continued need to have significant increases to pay for that last but major improvement in our system there in the southeast portion of the village, and after we get those rates caught up with the debt service for that over the couple to three construction cycles for that project, then again in the out years the annual increases will decline, and
Even with
and again,
water maintenance business? Oh, water is different. Okay.
so
Mark, what is our overall debt? Is it 55 million?
I don't have that number available.
It's not in here.
That sounds in the ballpark, but I can certainly, yeah, I'm sure it was in a CAFR. I would have to reference that document. I'm at home right now. I just don't have it with me.
I think it's around 55. Okay, thank you.
So that's staff summary. Anything else that we've missed or you'd like to review again? I hope you found this a little more interactive than listening to me stand up at the podium for 2.5 hours, just going line by line. There are some good narratives within the plan that try to describe some of the things that are happening numerically in the table. I think we've covered the essentials of the key indicators that the plan is trying to address for the village board to contemplate, long-term policy decisions with, and any constraints or limitations that, are going to result based on, again, these, point in time projections, which we will review and update each year.
Thank you. Anybody have questions?
Oh, I have a question about page 23, estimated average residential property owner payments. My question is just sort of a point of information. In 2028 and 2029, the change from the prior year goes up markedly from, it tends to be 2% and 3% and it goes to 6.7, 6.42. Is that linked to a specific capital project? It's the last line in the
Yeah.
chart. And for 2028 and 2029, the numbers are typically 2% and 3%, sometimes lower, and then they jump to 6% for 2 years. I'm wondering.
To me, just looking at the total amounts above them, that looks to be a mathematical problem in the spreadsheet. I will review that. And again, I apologize. The spreadsheet's got an error in it that threw those numbers out of whack.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like a good problem to have.
Thanks.
I guess. Thank you.
All right, should we move on? What's next?
Well, that is it. Everything in Appendix A, we did review at our last meeting, and we've touched on the financial policies in Appendix B as a topic to come back at a future meeting. So,
What about Oakland Avenue? When did we talk about that? Before budget?
I'm not sure what aspect of that your inquiry relates to.
Did we make decisions on Oakland Avenue yet? I can't remember.
Well, at the last meeting, it was guidance was given to accelerate the Southern Oakland Avenue from 2028, was it, to 2024?
Okay, and
that is in this plan.
Okay, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So with no further questions, do we need to make a motion?
Yes, it was listed for consideration at the board's request last year as we reviewed the process. There was a request for formal action on the LRP.
So we move to approve the long-range financial plan? Is that the?
Correct.
Okay, I guess I motion to approve the Village of Shorewood long-range financial plan 2021 to 2030.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have a motion by trustee Warren, a second by trustee Ursink. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I just have a question, just more of a formality. So the motion and the second, does that include, I know that there were some changes that trustee Stokerbrand just had, and that Director Manuelson said he would make. Does that include those changes?
Could you, I would be open to a friendly amendment to, with adding with the approved changes, or with the recommended changes by the board during this discussion. Trustee Ursulou.
Yeah, I'll second that. I agree.
Okay. And staff, clerk or Rebecca, you know what those are, right?
I've got them noted, yeah.
Okay. So any further discussion? All right, seeing none, is this roll call or can we just do a regular vote?
A regular vote is fine.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Thanks, guys, that was painless. Is there anything else for the rest on the agenda today? No, so motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by trustee Carpenter, a second by
Trustee Stokenbrand.
trustee Stokenbrand. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries 6-0. Thanks, guys. I'll see
Thank
you
you.
Monday.
Yes.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.